I'm here with Brian Bilston in Macrofelt Library. I'm delighted to welcome you here, Brian. Though, of course, Brian isn't your actual name, it's your alter ego, because you like to keep your real identity private. Of course, I know it now. Just like to have a chat about your poetry and about being known as the Poet Laureate of Twitter, because that was how it all started. Or did it start before that?
No, it all really started with Twitter. I wasn't really writing much poetry beforehand. And yeah, Twitter was the first social media platform that I joined, not really with any intention of writing poetry, just simply hearing conversations at work from people younger than me who were talking about the need to optimize our social media strategy. And they talk about Twitter. I had no idea what it was, so I thought I'd better check it out. And so I joined it under the cover of darkness, under a pseudonym. I was probably on there for a couple of years before I really started to kind of write and share poems on it.
So was it lockdown that started it all?
It was before lockdown. It was quite some time before lockdown. I guess it was maybe about 10 years ago I joined Twitter, and so probably about 8 years or so since I've been starting to post up.
You were employed at that time as an academic publisher.
Yeah. I used to had a very kind of normal job, a slightly more steady job than being a poet. That was working in academic publishing, which I had done for many years. Before that, I was a bookseller for a few years, then got into publishing, which I kind of loved. But at the time I was getting interested in Twitter and started kind of sharing poems with people, it also came at a time when, in the world of academic publishing, it was very volatile. There were lots of reorganisations and takeovers, and it wasn't the job that I quite remembered it to be.
That happens, unfortunately. Jobs evolve and change over time, don't they?
Yeah.
So it was around 2016 that you left work, is that right?
That sounds about right. Yes. Although I've sort of been in and out a little bit since then. I've had had kind of another foray back into academic publishing for 18 months, and indeed until quite recently, I did spend 18 months working in a library.
Oh, right.
In one of the Bodleian libraries, because I kind of live in Oxford, and that was actually still coming out of lockdown. I think that I found, to my surprise, that somewhat kind of bizarrely, I missed interacting with people, and I needed some break away from my desk trying to write poems. So I got this really lovely job working evenings and every other weekend in a sort of language library, helping students, shelving books. Absolutely loved it.
And did you write poetry then too?
Well, no, obviously not. No, too busy, focused on the job in hand. Yes.
I know you're married with children. Are you known as the joker in the family, or does the humour all come out through your pen?
I'm not sure any of my family or indeed close friends would necessarily describe me as a joker particularly. But I've always been interested in humour. But it's one of those things. It's like, I'm trying to think that there's a comedian I saw not long ago. I think it was Stuart Lee who always kind of says, I'm not funny in real life. That's the thing. We're not sort of knowingly so. You don't really set out to kind of make jokes.
I read that you've been likened to a cross between Pam Ayres and Adrian Mole. Did you read either of those when you were younger?
Oh, that's a slightly new one. I mean, well, Adrian Mole, yes, I was a big fan of Adrian Mole. A few years ago now, I wrote a novel which was in the form of a diary, and that was kind of partly inspired by Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, and indeed, of course, he was himself a great comic poet, maybe slightly unintentionally. But I loved those. In fact, I'd kind of forgotten about the joy of Adrian Mole until I saw some anniversary. I think it was like when it would have been the Adrian Mole turning 50 or something like that, and it was in all the papers. I thought, I remembered those brilliant books, and so that got me into writing the diary. Pam Ayres, nothing against Pam Ayres, lovely woman, and some of her poems do make me laugh, but I wouldn't really see myself on the Pam Ayres side of things.
Bridget Jones, maybe?
Bridget, again, well, she had a common background in publishing, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of funny. I suppose I like to think I'm probably a bit more, I don't know, maybe politically engaged than Pam. Slightly more of an age, although she don't. In fairness, she does tackle issues. Now, particularly on social media, she does. Yeah. She does have kind of cares and passions that come through in her writing.
Bridget Jones seems to be more slapstick comedy, which seems more like your character in Diary of a Somebody.
Yeah, no, that's That's right. And the Brian of that diary is extended version of me, a sort of exaggerated version of me, I think, magnifying all of my faults.
You or of Brian?
Well, it's all rather grey areas.
You mentioned social commentary, and you do use that a lot in your poems. You have one that starts, "America is a gun and England is a cup of tea."
America is a gun, yes, that's right. Yeah.
What's Ireland then?
I can't remember the rhymes in that poem. That's interesting, that poem, because it is probably one of my most popular poems online. However, I kind of cringe whenever it's brought to my attention, because it's about the gun laws in America, and it was written for a very specific moment, specific happening on Twitter, and actually I struggle with the fact that it's become so popular, because I think once you take it out of that original context, I find it very, very flawed. And I don't really like. So it's never appeared in print in any of my collections.
So whenever you start to write poetry initially, was it specifically for Twitter?
I did. I mean, I suppose I was writing poetry beforehand, but it was really only for my own enjoyment, and the thought of sharing it with others would have been abhorrent to me. So it's a constant surprise that I do what I do now. In fact, stand up on stage sharing my own poems, because, it feels like I've spent most of my life almost deliberately avoiding being the kind of person that I am now.
Did being limited to 180 characters on Twitter, which is now, of course, extended to 240 characters, did it help you focus on writing shorter poems?
Yes, well, I think that was a challenge, but also I think it did help in those early days. Although it must be said, very quickly I learned how to cheat. So I realised that actually I could write longer poems and share them on Twitter. If I simply took a photo of the poem on my phone, I could just post it up as a picture, and it could have as many words in as I want, or as the human eye allowed. So I did cheat, but certainly a lot of those early poems, they were those kind of very short 140 characters.
Like the bus one, you caught the train.
You caught the last bus home. Yeah.
That was the first one I ever saw on Twitter during lockdown. Most people know you for that.
Yeah.
So existential questions and things like that, you do tackle the big questions sometimes in quite a sardonic or even sarcastic way, or maybe ironic is a better way to describe them.
Well, maybe, yes, I suppose so. I mean, but yes, it often starts off in I suppose, a more familiar place, such as, about missing bin day or something like that will then sort of move on to slightly sort of bigger, more important thoughts. But I mean, and also sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I will literally just stick with the topic of bin day and be kind of happy there. It really sort of depends on what mood and where the poem ends up taking me, really.
So do you get your inspiration from the small things in everyday life?
Yeah, I suppose so. And it's actually a lot. That always seems to be the place to start, because it's a lot harder to write a poem by thinking about the conceptual, I suppose.
Do you belong to a poetry group?
No, I don't. And I belong to a book group, but poetry group, indeed poetry readings, all of that was a complete closed door to me until I ended up, having to do this for a living. So it sounds like I was sort of pushed into it. I wasn't pushed into it, but it's kind of funny. I think probably the first poetry event that I went to was one in which I was headlining and reading my own poems. So it's all rather strange.
You mentioned the visual aspect of your poems, and I know you write in the form of Christmas trees, Venn diagrams, spreadsheets, or whatever. Was that so that you could take a picture of it to share on Twitter, or for the books?
Well, I think originally, to be honest, I think it was because I was having started kind of writing and sharing poems on Twitter. I realised quite early on that I was kind of sending them out in this very visual environment. They were surrounded by tweets, including photos and videos. And it occurred to me that, maybe if I could find more interesting ways to present my poems. And so I ended up writing these poems in the form of Venn diagrams and Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations on Scrabble boards. So it kind of sprung out of that, really. I probably do that less now than I used to, but I always try to, I think if there's some way to have some fun with formal structure, I do try.
Do you think generally poetry is best read out loud or to be savoured quietly? Or is there a place for both?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a place for both, and I think there are some poems that are best read out loud, best performed, best heard, On the other hand, there's a lot of poetry where really the only way to get to the heart of it is to read it, and probably read a poem multiple times if you've got the time and patience to do that. I think mine's probably less like that. Mine is more immediate. But it's always interesting. When I'm writing a poem, I've kind of learnt over the years that actually the best thing to do, having written it and thinking, right, that's it, I've got everything as it should be, is to actually read it out loud. Because it's often when I do that and I think, oh no, actually that line doesn't quite fall right, that word's not quite right there. So it's helpful in terms of the writing process to read out loud.
Have you plans for any more novels, or are you sticking to poetry?
Oh, well, that's a very pertinent question. I'm quite unusual for a poet in that I've got an agent, and so she's always keen for me to do things that aren't just poems, because presumably there's more money in it for her. So she's keen on a follow up to the Diary of a Somebody. So I'm kind of mulling that over at the moment, and I've had a few people ask about that. I think I would like to revisit it. The only thing is, it takes forethought and planning to write a novel.
A lot longer.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, a discrete entry like a poem that I could do either in an hour or a day or a week or whatever. But it would be it's its own thing.
Yeah.
I think poetry seems to be having a revival, with poets like Kay Tempest and other performance poets addressing social issues in their work. Would you be interested in developing your poetry in that way, or are you happy doing what you're doing?
Well, I'm probably kind of happy. I'm happy in the space that I occupy now, which I think which kind of fits most comfortably with me. I must say that actually quite a lot of this doesn't sit very comfortably with me, but I think that sort of, I do these days. I do a lot of readings, and I suppose I try to. I'm not the sort of poet to sort of walk up and down the stage and have all the words in my head and to kind of reel off these kind of these sort of wonderful poems about kind of life today. At the same time, I do try and make my shows into like a proper show, not just me mumbling poems into a microphone. Yeah. So I do think quite long and hard about all of that. So I'm in this sort of middle space, I think, as far as that goes.
And where do you stand on grammar with the grammar police? I know you made fun of them at one stage when they call out posts with grammar or spelling that isn't quite right.
Yeah. Well, on grammar, I have a kind of love-hate relationship with it. Because I think on the one hand, also having a background in publishing, you kind of come through that route where grammar is very important, and particularly can't have anything going out with typos. At the same time, I'm all for saying that language is constantly evolving, and grammar can be a helpful thing, but also sometimes it does get in the way too. So I'm up for having fun with grammar, which probably doesn't kind of hold well with the grammar police out there. So I'm always a bit kind of drawn between those two.
A lot of people on Twitter agree, and there are a lot who seem to take exception to grammar or spelling mistakes.
Yeah.
I know language evolves, and who are we to say what's right and wrong on the written page, even if it is a virtual page?
Yes, no, they're certainly not slow in correcting me.
And where do you stand on the Oxford comma, coming from Oxford?
I quite like Oxford comma, though. I think that's quite a controversial thing to say. I know it's often unnecessary, but I like it. Yeah.
Would you read a poem for us now?
Yeah, I could read one from here if you want. So this is a poem from my collection, Alexa, What Is There to Know About Love? And it's called She'd Dance. She'd dance like no one was watching, although she liked to think he was. The kitchen was her grand ballroom. Her partner was a mop. She'd foxtrot among the pots and pans. She'd pass a dough blade to the sink. And as she swept across the floor, her mind danced too. She'd think of how he'd held her in his arms at the Locarno and the Ritz, whirling, waltzing the world apart in the years before the kids, and longer still before the shadow the doctor spotted on his lungs. How dazzlingly they had danced, how dizzyingly she had spun. Her neighbours saw her sometimes, shuffling bent-backed to the shops, but at home she'd dance like no one was watching, although she liked to think he was.
Brian Bilston, thank you very much.